I will add something. He is Rajiv Parekh, not Rajiv Parekh, to be very correct. And he is one of the first vascular surgeons who started an independent department of vascular surgery in Delhi. He started this department of vascular surgery in Sir Gangaram Hospital in 1990. He completed his fellowship in the Royal College of Surgeons in UK in 1986. Then he came to India after being trained in vascular surgery in UK. And then, as I said, he started the first department of vascular surgery in Delhi in Sir Gangaram Hospital. And at present, we all know that he is director of the and chief vascular surgeon in a very renowned Medanta Hospital, Gurgaon. And he will today talk on the role of minimal invasive surgery in vascular surgery field. Role of where we can avoid knife. So he will speak on minimal invasive surgery in vascular. Thank you, Dr. Rajiv. You can start.
Good evening, friends. Very nostalgic, I've been here. I think part of these 995 CME series, which is actually a mind-blowing number. I don't think any other institution or body could have ever achieved this. So please share to the members and of course the organizers, because this is an unachievable feat. I don't think anybody, it's like a Donald Bradman or one of these scores which nobody can ever match. So congratulations once again. I do remember at least about 4 or 5 of these CMEs in which I have been host here. So on which I have been a part. So in this journey, one little break probably. Because of me. So thank you very much for the audience, and I think it's very encouraging on a Wednesday evening to come here and find so many people who are obviously only here for the academics, not just for the fun and frolic. So thank you, and we're grateful. Thank you for the pleasure of the privilege of the podium. Now, just brief little introduction about Delhi. They talked about Delhi. I actually was born in Old Delhi, Chandni Chowk. Maliwada, if anybody knows that area. Right? So we are my father's side of the family is a very old Delhi family. The history traces back to almost 800 years. 800 years. I have a book which tells us about that. And basically we are Jains. And about 800 years ago, they were actually Rajputs who used to be the Kiledars in the forward areas of Rajasthan. And they suddenly got influenced by the Jains, and they took over Jainism, and they became Jain, followers of Jain religion. And then one day they realized that this isn't enough to fill their make a livelihood. So then they took to jewelry. So they became jewelers. So once they became jewelers, so that they were very good. So they became jewelers to the kings of Delhi. In fact, one of the great ancestors of mine was also one of the Navratans of Akbar's court. Oh my God. And that's also there on the... Oh my God. So, there, the story is that somebody came with a big diamond which had to be analyzed as to what was the value. And उसको जो हमारे पूर्वज थे उन्होंने बहुत अच्छी तरह से परखा. So death was given as a title. Parakh is a title for us. It's not my surname. It's a title which then became a surname, and that's why we are called Parakhs. We are actually Jains, but otherwise it's Parakh, and he's absolutely right. It's not Parakh. It just got twisted in this. In Delhi, everyone starts calling me Parekh, Parikh, whatever. But it's actually Parakh, which is the correct.
Not Parekh.
It's Parakh, which is the actual real. So that was the story, and anyway, so that is my story and my linkage to Old Delhi, because we go back. I was born there and this thing. My father was also a doctor, as he said very rightly. He was a very renowned physician. Unfortunately, I lost him when I was only 12 years old.
Even your chacha.
My chacha still is. That's right. He's still practicing at the Parmanand Hospital in civil lines. So Then my father, fortunately, we had good fortune. He got the built up this house here in SDA, just down the road of Southern Development Area opposite IIT, and this is where I have lived. We moved here when I was about 12 years old, and we've lived there ever since. So this is my connection to South Delhi. We started off in Old Delhi, the heart of Delhi, and now we've been in South Delhi for all these years. School, college, Maulana MBBS, MS, FRCS, Gangaram Hospital, now Vedanta, all from that place. So that's my connection with Delhi, Old Delhi as well as South Delhi. So that's where we are. That's why I have so many friends amongst this, and we've met because Dr. Kudar, Dr.
Before Medanta, tell us about that.
I was in Gangaram Hospital. I joined Gangaram
And
Hospital.
before Gangaram?
Before Gangaram, I was in England. I did my MBBS and MS from Maulana Azad Medical College, and I went off. I did not do a registrarship in Maulana Azad. I went off and did my FRC, so I was there for about 6.5 years. Came back and straight away joined Gangaram. I was there for 21 years. 21 years in Gangaram, and then when Vedanta opened, I shifted to Vedanta. I've been there for the last 16 years. That's right. So just 2 innings. One was Gangaram, which is one of the most wonderful hospitals that I can say. The camaraderie and the togetherness that exists in that hospital is absolutely amazing. I still have so many friends there, and I know their wives and their children, because that was the meeting point for everyone there. That's a wonderful, wonderful hospital. So yes, and of course, now we moved on to Vedanta, and I'll show you what will be my journey as a vascular surgeon. We started off, So, vascular surgery, as it starts with surgery, as we've always talked about, it's surgery, and evolution came upon, and there's always a revolution, and the revolution in vascular surgery was the endovascular revolution. It was something which started reducing the bridges that we were making. Bridges meant that you had to actually, if there was a blood vessel which was blocked, you had to bridge it. Because it is blocked, so you bridge it. Now, what we are moving ahead is that instead of making bridges, we are making tunnels. We are going through the blockages and trying to open up those blockages and leave the native arteries, vessels, veins, whatever they are, leave them alone, let them be, and try and recanalize what God gave us. So, replacing bridges with tunnels, that is essentially what we're doing, and that's vascular endovascular surgery 2.0, and this is where it is. And I've often said, I wish I was 25 years younger, because the progress that is being made and the upgradations in technology are mind-blowing. Within 6 months, things happen which you cannot even imagine. It is so fascinating. I'll try and just show glimpse, just a few of those technologies which might be of interest to you, because it's something that we've probably been seeing when we were medical students or practicing surgeons or whatever, but that's what it was. So anyway, I think I shouldn't take much time introducing about me and myself. So vascular endovascular surgery, as I said, replacing bridges with tunnels, and that's what the topic is. That's my team at Medanta. And minimally invasive vascular interventions have completely transformed patient outcomes, because obviously if you are replacing a big surgical scar with 2 small puncture holes, obviously the morbidity and the mortality rates are going to be far, far less. And just about every part of the body has seen a tremendous revolution in terms of minimal invasive procedures, except one procedure which I'll tell you, which has stood the test of time, and it really is actually the best, and that is carotid surgery, and I'll talk to you about that as well. So, going back very briefly, atherosclerosis, as you all know, is the hallmark pathological lesion of aging. Everybody ages, which is inevitable. You are born to age. At age 25, the first plaque appears. At age 25, the first plaque appears in the dorsal thoracic aorta, and it then progresses and it increases. Every 25 years, more and more plaque develops. Eventually, at the age of 100, when you are supposed to attain moksha, as they say, because you're supposed to live 100 years, 25 years divided by, brahmacharya ashram, Vanprastha and Sannyas, that's right. So all these four, the definition was, I think, according to our great rishis and munis, was probably as a result of what they saw in the body which was happening. Why was the body aging? And that was because of deposition of cholesterol and atherosclerosis or progressive atherosclerosis. If there is diabetes, smoking and all the other lifestyle issues, there the progression of atherosclerosis can be really fast and super fast, and that's why diseases occur much earlier. But essentially it's the same thing which is happening in the body. So atherosclerosis, as you know, coronary artery disease, you all know much more than what even I do. Cerebrovascular disease, when we are talking about the brain and brain strokes, that of course is again something which is hallmark of atherosclerosis. Renovascular disease, causing renal shutdown and pushing the patient towards hemodialysis. That's the other one. The last one, but not the least, is peripheral vascular disease. Now, when we say peripheral vascular disease, don't forget the longest organ in the body are the blood vessels. We have, nobody can actually count it, but various estimates, somebody says 10,000 kilometers worth of blood vessels, length of blood vessels, all over the body, everywhere, arteries, veins, lymphatics, everything is vascular in origin in the broad framework. So there's a huge burden of disease that can occur in these arteries, and that is what affects what we call our vascular health, because that's what allows us to live and live comfortably. So we're going to talk about peripheral vascular disease, in which I'm going to actually just narrow down to three very important areas. One is diabetic peripheral vascular disease, because diabetes unfortunately is rampant in India, and because of diabetes, which causes progressive atherosclerosis in the body, this leads to almost 20% of patients who are diabetics, who have diabetes, will develop a foot infection or a lesion in the foot or in the ankle or whatever. And of these 25%, almost 20% of them will develop a gangrene which will require an amputation. Limited amputation, maybe of a toe, maybe of two toes, maybe of the forefoot, maybe of the heel, maybe of the leg. But an amputation is inevitable in 20% of patients with diabetic foot infections. And this is the surprising bit, that patients who undergo amputations because of diabetic foot infections, 50% of them will be dead in 5 years. Can you imagine? Anybody who has an amputation, diabetic foot amputation, will be dead within 5 years. 50% of these patients will die. So you can imagine the enormity of the disease and the disease burden that exists in our society today, especially in India, where diabetes is rampant. So this is something that I'm going to talk about. The second thing is aneurysmal disease. We think and we probably feel that aneurysms don't occur in India, or they're not so many, but this is published in the New England Journal of Medicine that 10% of patients who have undergone a coronary artery intervention, whether open surgery or bypass, open surgery or angioplasty, 10% of these patients, 10 years after the intervention, will and can develop an aneurysm. That's a huge number. Considering the number of angioplasty that happen all over India, considering the number of open bypass surgeries that happen all over India, 10% of those patients in 10 years, if they're going to develop an aneurysm, you can imagine the burden of disease there as well, because these are progressive atherosclerotic changes which are occurring because of disease in the wall of the aorta, because that is stretching and then fragmenting. I'll show you that as well. And also the last but not the least is carotid disease. 25% of patients with major heart disease, which is left main disease, coronary artery disease, will have significant carotid stenosis, which will require, which can lead to TIAs, which can give rise to TIAs and eventual strokes. So these are three very important areas where peripheral vascular disease actually affects our lives and our, the morbidity associated with it. So when anybody has a diabetic foot ulcer and gangrene, the question is, can we prevent amputation? Because if there is gangrene, then you have to have, at least that portion has to be amputated. So for which you have to assess the vascularity, you have to make sure that there is enough blood going down in that area. And how do we do that? Because any wound which doesn't heal within 15 days. So a diabetic patient comes to you with a foot wound and he says that the wound has not healed for 25 days or a month. that should put your antennas up, because why should an ulcer or a wound not heal? Every wound starts to heal at least within 15 to 20 days. So if it's not healing up to 20-25 days, then obviously means that there is a reduction or a paucity of blood supply. So you should look into that. And the only way to assess the vascularity you can do is by a simple color Doppler examination. This is available everywhere. You don't need any specialized treatment, options for that. Ultrasoundologists world over can do anywhere in the city or outside, can do ultrasound color Doppler examination. But then they have to be confirmed with an angiography. When we say angiography, they need to be given contrast. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the patients with diabetes have borderline kidney disease. Their creatinines are moving up because of the diabetic nephropathy which is happening. Now, obviously, in a patient who has diabetic nephropathy, kidneys, creatinine going up, you cannot subject them to a contrast angiography, because direct acute kidney injury can occur and these patients can be pushed towards dialysis. So what do we do here? We have a very sophisticated mechanism of what we call carbon dioxide angiography. So no contrast, no iodine, nothing which damages kidneys. These patients with compromised renal function, carbon dioxide can be injected through this special apparatus that you can see here on the left side, and these are the images that you get. This is an angiography done by carbon dioxide. So you can actually, all you have to do is to reverse the image and you can see very good opacification. You can actually do any angioplasty or any procedure that you want or wish to do on the basis of the carbon dioxide angiography. So that is how we do it, because it's extremely important to improve the vascularity, because that is mandatory. Now, whenever an artery is blocked, usually what happens is, this is something that happens which you know about. I'm just going to push through this. Most of the arteries are narrowed, they are not blocked, they are narrowed. So you put in a balloon and you pass, you pass a wire and you blow in the balloon, the artery opens up, you put in a stent and the artery opens up. This is usual standard for the coronaries, for anywhere else, for the carotids everywhere, you can do that. But in diabetes, something different happens. The arteries are not narrowed, they are blocked. It is a CTO, a complete total occlusion. The artery is completely blocked. So you cannot go through this block. There is no way that you can push a wire through this. This is rock hard. So what you need to do is you have to strip the atheroma from the side with a wire, and then take a balloon and then flatten this atheroma along the side so that the atheroma remains but on one side so that the blood flows through. So this is called marginalizing the atheroma or subintimal angioplasty, and this opens up diabetic arteries without stents. You don't need stents for this. So you can open up this artery and the blood will flow, and it makes a tremendous difference. You can see here a patient whose wound was not healing already had lost one toe. This popliteal artery is completely blocked. We've done subintimal angioplasty here. We've connected the anterior tibial artery here. So now the patient who did not have blood going down into his foot here has a 3-vessel runoff, and sure enough, within 6 weeks the wound healed up. So this is what subintimal angioplasty can do. We can increase the blood supply without putting in stents, and the patients can actually get out and get there. Now this is what used to be done. This is something that we've always done. Now what has changed? I was going to show you some exciting stuff, which is what is actually really driving up this endo revolution. So it's technology which is pushing the boundaries, and what we do here is, if you plan to intervene whenever there is a patient who has a blocked artery, either it used to be surgical, in which you used to cut open the artery, open it out, take out atheroma, pull out clots and everything. That was open surgery which used to be done. Today, endovascular options, and I'll show you those. What you can do is, instead of cutting out any arteries, you puncture the arteries, put in 2 special catheters attached to a machine, and it sucks the clot out. No surgery, no cuts, no stitches, no major procedures done. And of course, if there is a problem, we can even do a combination, that means part surgical and part endovascular, to achieve a better result. But for this technology is required. And look at, this is our operating suite. This is the Artis Evo, this is a robot. This is a robotic cath lab which actually moves both sides of the table. It can come up to the foot end, it can go around and around the patient also. And this is a robotic Artis Evo platform. This is the IVUS, that is the intravascular ultrasound, but that is the lab that we have at Medanta, which is how we use this. Now, if you see you have a patient here, I'm showing you some angiograms. This artery is blocked here This artery is, as you can see here, this is blocked, this artery is completely blocked here. This artery is completely blocked, it's full of thrombus. There is no flow going down into this leg. Now, previously what we could do, what we had to do was to open up the artery and we remove the clots. The clot has to be open up the artery and we remove the clot. And with this, what we could do, we had these, we had what are these Fogarty balloon catheters. This would go in, and with this we would pull out the catheter, and as we pulled it out, the artery, the clot started coming out. You can see. Can you see the clot coming out? This is how we used to open up the artery, and the clot used to just keep coming and coming and coming and coming and coming. This clot has come out from the leg of this patient. Can you imagine? This is how open surgery was done. This is how it was done. Now today, what we do is none of this, no surgery, no cuts, no stitches. Two special catheters, which are penumbra catheters, two special machines which are going to suck this clot out. So two catheters through two puncture holes in the groin, and we go in, and here the catheter moves up and down, and here you can see both of them sucking away, taking out the clot, which we call the double horse technique. Okay? So basically we are sucking out clot from both, we can suck out clots from both the arteries. I don't know whether this is clear. Is this clear? But anyway, so ye two machines which are used to suck out the clot. Okay, well, that's the background music. I guess we Okay, doesn't matter. I think we raised the pitch. So this is, see, the aorta was completely blocked. This is what has come out with this machine. And the artery is now completely open. No cuts, no surgery, and this thrombus has come out from the aorta. Otherwise, we would have had to open up both the groins and pull out both the clots from the sides. But this is what we can do. Percutaneous mechanical thrombectomy, as we call this, and no surgery and no cuts, and this can be done and remove the clots completely. Now, what happens if there is not a clot but there is a blockage, and the blockage is not allowing the cutting the atheroma, entering into the machine, and it is making a passage. You twist it and you cut again. So one you cut from the base, then from the side, both sides, and then the root. And you open this up and the whole artery opens up. No cuts, no stitches, no operation, and this can be opened up and this can be removed completely. So you can see it's a rotating knife which cuts this atheroma and takes it out. Into this is connected and taken out of the body. Now, this is again another very fancy gadget which is available now. And here, can you see this is the Rotarex excisional atherectomy system. It cuts as well as sucks any clots which are there. So it's opening a passage and making a clear passage all the way through. Again, no cuts, no stitches, no surgery. Just push this in, take this out, and the artery opens up. So this is the power of technology today. Small thin catheters, when you see it, you say, oh my God, how is this going to do all this? But that's exactly what it does. It goes inside and cuts out these arteries and takes this out. So then there is a third thing. Suppose there is so much calcium. See, in diabetes, in diabetic atherosclerotic disease, there's a lot of calcium which deposits. Calcification, diabetic calcification, you've all heard of. So what do we do for that? There is an intravascular lithotripsy catheter. Just as you break kidney stones with lithotripsy, we have catheters which can go inside the artery. Inside the artery, it is going in again through a puncture hole, and with this very fancy machine, which is basically a lithotripsy generator, pulse generator, and it fractures the calcium, makes a passage, and then you can either do an atherectomy properly, or you can put in a stent and open up the artery. So all of this without surgery, without cuts, without stitches. So if it is a thrombus, you suck it out. If it's a plaque which is stuck to the skin, to the inside of the artery, you can cut it out and remove it. These patients, as you can see, I'm sorry I'm showing you for your dinner, but these patients would have obviously been assigned for amputation. I don't think very much of this would be salvageable. But today, there are lots of techniques. We first improve the blood supply, and then we can start giving them topical oxygen. There's this new modality of treatment. We could pressurize oxygen, and this actually topically oxygen, which is pressurized oxygen, and this pushes the oxygen directly. So it's a home care therapy. You can have this done at home. And you have this machine which comes 90 minutes every day, and this pressurizes oxygen locally, which once the oxygen therapy is introduced, you can see the oxygen high pressure, it results in faster and more durable healing, and because of the compression it reduces, because there is pressure. This is a bag into which this oxygen, so because of the pressure it reduces the edema and it increases the peripheral circulation, and the humidification causes effective healing. So this modality can result in what you can see here. Look at this wound. This wound, this foot should be amputated. But this is what, after 10 sessions, after 25 sessions, and after 40 sessions, the wound almost heals up. Lot of effort. First increase the blood supply, then you give all these adjuvant therapies, and then you can see that these patients' wounds can be salvaged. I'm not saying 100% of them can be salvaged, but even if we can salvage 70, 60, 70% of these patients, at least you have 70 less people walking with crutches. So that's what it is. So for faster sustained healing, especially for diabetic foot ulcers, we can use this for 6 times more likely to heal these wounds, 71% reduction in amputations, and 88% reduction in hospitalization. Because if you have an open wound, these patients are prone to septicemia from that, and they have repeated hospital infections and pneumonias and other things, and cost of surgery and everything, and cost of procedure and hospitalization also increases. So all of this can be minimized if we achieve things, selective patients, selective therapies at the right time. Now once the wound has healed up, that patient, if he starts walking on this foot, this is again going to be a problem because he's going to damage the foot again. So here we have another special machine, and this is basically it's a pedobargram. That means when you walk on the patient, this picks up the high and low pressure areas in the foot, and this is that the images are converted into a computerized format, and this information is fed into what is called a pressure sensor. This picks up the pressure exerted by the body on the foot, and this information is pushed into a milling machine, and that milling machine will actually manufacture an insole for you while you wait there. It takes half an hour, and this, if a patient has a flat foot, if a patient is getting repeated corns, if a patient is having recurrent ulcerations, this is an orthotic device or an insole which can be inserted into any shoe. You can put it under this one, put it into the other one, and the patient can actually walk away with this insole in half an hour. And this will prevent further pressurization and prevent ulcers or recurrences of ulcers. So this is as far as peripheral vascular disease, diabetic ulcers, this thing is concerned. Now I'm just going to skip turn and then go on to aneurysms. Again, we talked about aneurysms. It's rare under 50, but for diabetics, high blood pressure, tobacco smokers, 10 years post any coronary intervention, these patients are liable to, 10% of them can have aneurysm. So it's a large group which should not be overlooked. Now this is what happens in these patients. If you can see, doesn't matter. Okay, so basically this was to show this aneurysm actually starts to expand because of the degradation of the intima, and this is how the aorta expands and then turns to an aneurysm. And once the aneurysm occurs, this is a CT angiogram, and you can see that there is an aneurysm here, and this aneurysm then has to be treated. Now when we say treated, that means, see, this is just the rotatory CT scan that you can see, and then how do we treat this? Through a puncture hole in the groin, a wire is placed in the aorta through the aneurysm, and you put in a stent graft which goes in and opens up on one side. Then you put another wire from the other side and connect this with this, and the aneurysm is sealed because you've got two stent grafts in this If there was a thoracic aneurysm somewhere in the region of the thoracic aorta, again another wire is passed through and again another stent graft is placed across this aneurysm, and once this opens up, it seals the aneurysm. Again, no surgery. This is treating abdominal aortic aneurysm. That's a big aneurysm that you can see here. That's the graft that has been placed after surgery, during surgery, and this is what the patient is going to go away with. Can you imagine that incision? And this is how our patient goes home. No cuts, nothing here, 2 little puncture holes, aneurysm in, the stent graft in place, aneurysm excluded, and the patient walks home. And this is essentially how it is done. This is the follow-up. You can see this post-endovascular. You can see the stent graft very nicely in place. The aneurysm is gone. The arteries are flowing. Both legs are going, and the aneurysm is fixed. So this is how aneurysms are treated now. Now, as far as aneurysms this was concerned, now coming back to one very important area where surgery has still prevailed, and that is the region of the carotid artery. Carotid artery, as you can see here, this is the carotid artery. There is a narrowing here. This narrowing, because of this plaque, is causing TIAs. This person is having repeated strokes, can have a complete occlusion. If this gets completely blocked, this artery, this patient will have a stroke. So what do? We have the option of either putting in a stent. We put in a filter wire, and through that we put in a stent. You can see a stent. But don't forget that when you put in a stent, the plaque still remains. The plaque is just being pushed to the side. The plaque hasn't been removed. That plaque is the home of further TIAs. You can have further TIAs going up, and of course the plaque can grow again, and you can block off the artery. So if there was something that we could do to remove the plaque, and that is what surgery used to do 55 years and running, even today, this is the treatment that anybody, once you have this is the plaque, this is the platelet thrombi which are going to go into the brain, and this is what the plaque comes out. We open the surgery, and believe it or not, this procedure, carotid endarterectomy, is done under local anesthesia. The patient is awake. The patient cannot feel pain but is awake, and he keeps telling us that the other side of that means if you're operating on the right side, we give him a little squeaky toy on the left side and we ask him to keep squeaking. The minute, as many number of times as he can do it, we know that the cross circulation of the brain is fine. It's the best monitor in the world. Costs you nothing except a small squeaky toy. You give it to them, and these patients can be opened up, the plaque comes out. Yes, there is a cut, but it completely fades into oblivion over a period of time. And imagine what you've got. You've taken out this, and the artery is completely plaque free. No, hardly any chances of any further TIAs or restenosis or plaque burdens. So this is something which for stroke prevention, probably, we do put in stents also. Patients need stents if suppose they cannot undergo surgery. If there is a complication, the coronary arteries are so bad, the patient cannot lie still or whatever, then you can put in a stent as well. But if the person is fit and well, this person should have an endarterectomy, because that will clear his problems forever. Now that is as far as I try. For me to stop, I can.
Wow.
रुक सकते हैं, लेकिन अगर आप चाहें तो मैं आपको 5-7 मिनट और ले Thank you, that's very encouraging. So, abhi tak to we talked about only arteries. Now I'm talking about veins, which is also very, very important. It's a very important part of our body. Deep vein thrombosis. This is something which happens to a lot of patients, especially pregnant women. Pregnant women, and for some reason, most of them have left-sided femoral deep vein thrombosis, left leg DVT. You know why? Because there is an anatomical reason. Babies, most of them are born with a left occipito-anterior position. That means their head is resting against the pelvic brim on the left side. They pressurize the femoral vein, and that is how thrombosis occurs, and that is why this patient develops. Female patients in the postpartum period or during that period, they develop left iliofemoral deep vein thrombosis because of this anatomical reason. And this is something that happens. Now, once this happens, these patients will then go on over a period of time. They'll start developing blackish discoloration, they'll start developing ulcers, they will start developing, this pachydermatitis, and this will just go on post-traumatic syndrome. And why does this occur? This is because the blood which is going up, if it is going to keep flowing down and causing collection, the valves get affected because the blood keeps flowing up and down, and if the valves don't close, they get damaged because of the thrombosis. They will form a clot in that area. Now once they form the clot, what do we do? The clot is formed if it is fresh, which means that we can pick it up within about 7 to 14 days of development of this clot. There is something that we can do again without surgery. And this is this absolutely wonderful machine with a brain. This is a Penumbra machine, an indigo aspiration system. It has this very specialized catheter which can go in, and if suppose there's a clot in the legs, you can suck out the clot. If the clot has moved into the lungs, has caused pulmonary embolism, and the patient is finding it difficult to breathe or has a problem, this can even go all the way into the lungs, and we can pull out clots from the lungs also. This is computer-assisted venous thrombectomy. The catheter has gone from the femoral vein, it has gone into the pulmonary artery. You can see hardly any blood going. This is a lung, by the way. You know, it's collapsed lung because not much blood is going through. And here we pulled out this atheroma, clot, you can see, and now look at the circulation. This and this is out in the box. And this can be done within 5 to 7 minutes. And the patient is awake and he suddenly starts to breathe because this is out of the system, and this is something that we can do on an emergency basis 24/7 anytime, because we have what is called a PERT team, which is Pulmonary and Embolism Rescue Team. The minute you land in the hospital, you'll be rushed with a CT angiogram and straight away go on to the catheter and remove this. Now, if suppose a person, as I showed you, has a clot in the legs, what do? There is this another very fancy
beyond the clot,
which goes up. The catheter goes up, this goes up beyond the thrombus was here, and this mesh opens up like a little bag. And then when
the
you
corneal
withdraw
element
it,
is slowly retracted,
it
going to sheath,
traps the
wall of your
thrombus.
clot from the vessel.
The thrombus can be removed with this very special bolt thrombectomy catheter, and this can be done, as I said, from there. This can even be inserted into the lung, into the pulmonary artery, and we can withdraw this catheter out, removing the clot even from the pulmonary artery. So amazing amount of comfort, and you can see here.
ये बताओ कि पल्मोनरी एम्बोलिज्म के साथ जब आए थे और ऑपरेशन और क्लॉट निकाल दिया तो क्या डिफरेंस लग रहा है?
पहले मेरे को जैसे बहुत सांस वगैरह फूलता था, और उसके बाद वो निकालने के बाद मेरी ऐसा लगा कि मेरा 90% मेरे को ठीक हो चुका है.
So, and this is what came out. This is the thrombus which came out of his lungs. So this is something which can actually change the life of most of these patients.
आराम से सांस आ रही है.
आराम से सांस आ रही है. That's what she said as well. Now, if you have leg clots and let them be, over a period of time they develop what are called varicose veins. A lot of these patients will start developing reflux, and this is what will happen. You will develop post-traumatic varicose veins. Here you cannot do a straightforward, full-fledged varicose surgery, endovenous laser or radio frequency or whatever. Here you have to be very selective and do a programmed, a regulated procedure so that these patients don't develop worse problems. But if there are non-functional valves and these patients develop varicose veins, there are treatments. You can see laser treatments. Patient, again without surgery, again without any cuts or stitches, one small puncture hole, the catheter with the tip of the tip of which is a laser point. It goes through a catheter, comes out into the vein, and once the laser energy is liberated inside the vein, it contracts and it scleroses, and you keep pulling out the laser catheter, and you can see here that the vein actually closes in front of your eyes, and the whole thing shrinks, and the pressure which is exerted down onto the feet for these varicose veins will disappear. Look at the difference. Patient comes with this, goes back with this. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. This takes almost 4 to 6 months for all this to settle down. But it does, without any cuts, without any stitches. All this can be done over a period of time to remove all these clots, these varicosities. Look at the difference. No cuts, no stitches. Previously, we would have had to give some big, huge incisions to take all this out. That's what it is. So, anyway, that is essentially what it is. And this is, of course, there is another treatment which we now have, and that is the glue treatment, which is again another absolutely amazing thing. There's a little gun with this glue which can be actually inserted inside the vein, and this also causes the vein to stick. So a huge big vein which you can see here, this vein, you push in this catheter, it goes all the way in here, then you remove the sheath, remove the obturator, take this out, and then you inject glue through this. And under ultrasound guidance, this procedure has to be done in the operating room under ultrasound guidance. That's the ultrasound probe. And here, a bit of the glue comes out. We push the glue through the gun, push in some more here. And the minute this is done, and you can see it under the ultrasound control, you just press the skin on top, and the vein closes. It's as simple as that. No cuts, no stitches. The patient actually gets up. Here in Defense Colony Medanta Mediclinic that we do, I'm here twice a week, every Tuesday and Saturday. We do 4 to 5 cases every time I'm there. Patients come in the morning at 10 o'clock after a light dinner, and they walk back home by 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a completely mobile daycare procedure, and that can actually finish the procedure and give you a fantastic amount of work. So, very briefly, one more time, I'm sure you are tired, but I can show you this very quickly. People who do not want to have a knee replacement. Lot of leg pain, lot of painkillers, but still don't want any painkillers, knee replacement, either for a medical reason or a personal reason or whatever reason. They can be helped. What we can do is, we can go in, and this is the inflammation which is occurring because of the arthritis. And here we can take a catheter through into the genicular arteries of the knee joint, and we can inject these particles into this, and you can see the inflammation subsides and the pain reduces. The knee doesn't get repaired. If a patient needs a knee replacement, he will continue to take, will need one, but the pain will go, the painkillers, the requirement of painkillers will reduce, and you can actually gradually go on and work much better. So that's what it is. The same thing happens with the prostate. You don't want to have surgery, or there's a medical reason that you cannot undergo prostate surgery. This is again something that you can do. Go in from the femoral artery, inject the imipenem elastin material, and this can shrink the prostate, and you can at least pass urine. The prostate remains, the swelling reduces, and you can actually go on without, pass a urine without a catheter. The same thing happens for the uterus. You don't want to have a hysterectomy for whatever reason, and there is a fibroid which are bleeding away, catheter in the uterine artery, block this thing, and this can actually stop the fibroid from growing and bleeding, and this actually also does the same thing. This is, of course, as I told you, our 24-hour aortic aneurysm train. Patients are walked in, they are taken in straight away into the theatre, CT scan, and the procedure is done, and they, fortunately, hopefully, if we can revive them, we try our best to do. So, thank you very much for the privilege. And you've been a fantastic audience. None of them, I could not spot a single person sleeping because it's late in the night, and I really appreciate it. Thank you very
So thank you very much for a wonderful deliberation. I think you covered probably the entire gamut of the vascular disease, both arterial as well as. I'm sure there will be many questions, and I would give it to Dr. Poddar sir to kindly ask questions. It's a very important topic, and therefore it's not only for people. Yes, Roxanne, I will be coming to you. First to the moderator to set the context.
न्यूज़ भी सुननी भाई.
So thank you, Dr. Rajiv, for covering. Initially, I thought he will cover only on arterial diseases. Then he covered venous diseases, and then later on non-vascular diseases also, where vascular intervention can help, like in gynecological diseases. So my first question is, you said where CT contrast angiography not feasible, we can do CO2 angiography. So is there any risk of embolism, air embolism sort of thing when you inject CO2 in the artery?
That is, so absolutely right. This would always be something that one would think of. But carbon dioxide belief is as you know a solvent. It dissolves in blood. Carbon dioxide dissolves in blood. So what we do is we use about maximum 30 to 35 ml of carbon dioxide at a time, and we wait for about 5 minutes for the carbon dioxide to get absorbed and be exhaled by the patient, and then we give the next lot of carbon dioxide. So there is no, there is no risk of embolism because it gets dissolved. Air does not get absorbed because there is nitrogen in it. 72% of air is nitrogen, which does not get absorbed, which is the reason why you get air embolism. But carbon dioxide does not give rise to. That's the reason why carbon dioxide.
So any role of MR angiography instead of contrast CT angiography, MR angiography, is it feasible here?
Yeah, MR angiography is a very, very good alternative, but you see, MR angiography also we need to, most of the times for arteries, we need to, especially if you're talking below knee, which is what diabetic disease is, it also requires a contrast. The gadolinium contrast, that also is nephrotoxic. So beyond a point, if the creatinine is more than 1.8 or 1.9, you cannot use gadolinium contrast. There are some new contrasts available now, but they're extremely expensive. They can be used, but the regular contrast which is used for MR angiography cannot be used if the patient has diabetic, nephrotoxicity.
Wonderful information. So, one in coronary thrombectomy, whenever it is done by cardiologist, intervention cardiologist, it is usually followed by stenting. So, what in peripheral artery? Because you are doing only thrombectomy, then any need of stent as it is in coronary arteries?
Most of the times the coronary arteries have what are called atheromas or plaques. Those plaques means that there is a physical obstruction to the flow of blood. And if you remove, and there you have to stretch the lumen, you have to increase, you need a luminal gain for the artery to flow. For that you need to put in a stent. In the long peripheral arteries, if after doing the thrombectomy, if you do take a run and if the artery is completely open and there is no atheroma, you don't need to put in a stent. You would only put in a stent if there is a narrowing which is left after having cleared it. Then if we sew it, then we put in a stent or we do an atherectomy, and that can all be done percutaneously as well.
My last question, in topical oxygen therapy you showed very good results where amputation rate is, I think, very low after giving topical oxygen therapy. Earlier we were giving hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So any comparison between hyperbaric oxygen and this topical oxygen?
Yes. This topical oxygen is hyperbaric oxygen. As you saw the bag. There is a bag. I don't know whether these guys have got it here. I've told them to bring it. There is a bag which is pressurized. So this is hyperbaric oxygen at the local area. You don't hyperbaric oxygen. What you had was a big huge chamber. The whole patient had to go into it. So that is not, and plus then you have to go and travel to the hospital where the machine is. This thing can be brought to your house, and only the area affected is the one which is inside the bag, and it gives you hyperbaric oxygen. So it's the same thing.
So this is targeted hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I did this, so good targeted therapy anywhere better. Thank you, Dr. Parikh, Dr. John.
Dr. Sen Gupta has a question. I will come to you.
So thank you very much for a marvelous lecture. Two quick questions. First, all the procedures that you showed, the arterial systems, etc., and the thrombectomies, etc., do you usually put in some kind of a mesh also so that the debris doesn't get embolized, or is that a protective feature that you put in only in very selected cases?
That's a wonderful question. Obviously, that means you really paid attention to what I said. Basically, when you are doing an atherectomy, there is it's a finite chance that some small particulate matter can actually break through and then go distal, and that can cause a problem. But invariably, most of the time, when we start doing from the top where the blockage is still persisting at the end.
so nothing is going to go through. So we try and aspirate everything that occurs below that. That's number one. And number two, when there is an excessive risk of distal embolization or fragmentation as it is called, then we have a filter. The same filter which goes into the carotid artery, that same filter is introduced out there and we can use it. The reason why we don't use it routinely, because it adds significantly to the cost. These devices are expensive, nothing is cheap. Technology is not cheap. You know, I mean, if you buy an iPhone, it's $140,000. so the higher the technology that goes into it, that is the reason why we try to be selective in using filter devices. But
Thank
we
you.
use your right.
Yeah. And the second question, very interesting what you showed, the genicular artery embolization and the prostatic embolization. So what is your protocol in the sense that do you have any anticoagulation or anti-clotting profile that you need to initiate post-surgery, I mean post-intervention? And secondly, how long does the effect last? I mean, because the body is always under a situation of fibrinolysis, etc., whatever you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely right. You see, remember what we are doing? We are taking a catheter, a very thin, ultra-selective catheter, going through the femoral artery, into the genicular artery, into the branches there. And we are injecting inside the inflamed vessels. We want them...
What do you inject, sir?
Cinnamon and Celastin. This is basically, it's an antibiotic, but it has particle size of about 200 to 250 microns, and this goes in and sets up an inflammatory reaction inside the small micro vessels of the genicular arteries, thereby reducing the inflammation. That is what we want. We want to reduce the inflammation, thereby reduce the swelling, thereby reduce the pain, and allow the patient to walk. So no need of any prolonged anticoagulation because we've gone far distal. So the chances of any clotting are fairly, almost negligible. That's number one. And after that, there is a little bit of swelling which occurs because of the edema, which can be taken care of by ice packs and stuff like that. So that can be used. So that is as far as this is concerned. What was the second question?
The similar procedure that you're doing in the prostatic.
The prostate also, the same thing. The catheter is taken in, and once that happens, the swelling reduces. Once the swelling reduces, the patient can pass urine. The prostate still remains. The size of the urethra reduces, increases, so that the flow of urine can start.
Fabulous, sir. And how expensive are these procedures?
These are expensive, but since this is primarily only these selective catheters, ultra-selective catheters, you can imagine what
and more palliative in terms of the pain or
that's right.
discomfort.
So about this would cost about 2 to 2.5 lakhs.
Thank you so much, sir.
Including
Absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
Dr. Sankar, please come here. Dr. Sankar Pandey, orthopedic surgeon.
Namaskar, sir. It's a very nice talk. Thank you, sir. But I want to ask that you have shown that a genicular artery embolism. So I want to know that for how many duration you feel like that it will work. And then after, because you said that knee is not going to heal on its own. So for how many days it will work, and after how many days you feel like that you can repeat the procedure, or you should go for the TKR?
So the first question absolutely is TKR. If a patient has a damaged knee, if a patient has a mutilated knee and this thing, the answer is a TKR. There is no running away from that. A patient needs a TKR, that is what we tell them as well. The first thing that we write in bold letters is patient refusing TKR. This is not something that is given as a first line treatment that you come to us, don't get a TKR done, get this done. Never. That is not the treatment. That is not the indication. The indication is somebody who has a medical reason that he can't undergo a TKR, somebody who has some other problems, you cannot give spinal or epidural, and the patient is unfit for GA. There are a lot of medical indications, contraindications for those patients. If they are having severe pain, this is something that gives them relief. It gives them relief. We have seen, there is no duration which is mentioned that it will give you relief for 5 days or 15 days or 1 month. This is something that we have seen over the last 5 years, that we've been 4 years that we've been doing this. We have seen patients going almost pain-free or with very minimal painkillers for up to 6 months to a year, or maybe even longer. We have follow-up for up to about 2 years. We have the longest the earliest patient that we did was almost about, say, 4 years ago. That patient is the one who encouraged us because he is still pain-free. He's still pain-free, he's not having any pain. So there is nothing to tell us that this patient is going to respond better or no. This is basically something which will give you time, let the patient think. Once he's had this procedure and he still has a problem, he can still go for a TKR, which he must. We are never for a moment telling him not to undergo a TKR.
Sir, it's a good thing, but the thing is that if we are putting an hyaluronic acid inside the knee joint, or we are putting some PRP or something like that, GRC, what is a very new kind of procedure we are doing, or the radio ablation therapy, these also gives the duration of 1.5 years or 2 years to the patient. And it costs much less because you have just now told that it costs around 2.5.
Yeah.
And this will be costing around 25,000 rupees only, not 30,000 maximum.
Yeah. So again, as I said, you are absolutely right. There are multiple modalities. Once a person has gone through routine painkillers, then he's gone through one of these, either hyaluronic acid or PRP or something, and the pain has come back again. This is another modality that we are offering, which can be tried and can give you period relief over a period of time. So again, because you see, once you give a patient hyaluronic acid, it doesn't have pain relief, he's not going to go back again for it. He's going to ask for something different. So for that, you have an alternative therapy. As I'm saying, I'm not for a moment challenging or advocating this as first-line therapy. Never, I mean, because it isn't. It is just a pain relieving, swelling relieving, allowing the patient to walk therapy.
My last question is, sir, if we are repeating, have you ever in your clinical practice repeat the therapy? Because it's very common, because after 2 years, if the patient is still having pain, again the pain is come back. So can you repeat the therapy, vascular therapy, or should he go for the TKR, or you are advising him to go for any other modalities?
No. So, you see, usually whenever there is this patient who's undergoing this procedure, we have an MRI done. There will be an inflamed area that you will see. That means either it is the medial side or the lateral side or whichever side. So we target that area, and next time when he comes back, if suppose another area is being highlighted, okay, then you go in for that. So you can actually change the location of the selective arterial embolization and give this person pain. So this is possible, and it is we haven't done it. We haven't been doing this long enough for these patients to come
Is there any clinical trial that this has been done? Where repeated trials have been done?
No, no trials have been published, but they have been done. There is a trial which was published from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. They were doing this for about 4 years, and they are claiming 70 to 80% pain relief at 1.5 years, 18 months.
So basically the patient who was having osteoarthritis, he has only one problem. That is pain. That's it, nothing more than that.
True.
If he has got relief to the pain, everything is solved.
That's right.
He doesn't require anything more.
True, absolutely.
That's it.
So that is what we are doing, and this, there's a study which is published from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. 18 months, 80% pain. They published it. It's in
Sir, Dr. Pawan Chaudhary, spine surgeon at Balaji Action, and now at Gangara, your previous destination.
Sir, very wonderful presentation. Just a small question. You advise in cases of carotid block, that in most of the patients you are preferring that open surgery. So, sir, you must have heard about the SPACE trial, which compares the stent-protected angioplasty versus the open surgery. And it said there is no significant difference between the two. So, is there any specific subset of patients in which you prefer the open surgery, or in your experience, what is the results of a comparison?
Excellent question. SPACE trial that you're talking about. After that, another study was done, which is called the CREST trial. The CREST trial, carotid revascularization endarterectomy versus stenting trial. So this had almost 60,000 patients enrolled, 45,000 patients enrolled, and there they said very categorically that if a patient has significant coronary artery disease and the patient has significant mortality associated with the coronary artery disease, this patient should be subjected to a stenting, but stenting causes TIAs. So anybody who has, stenosis, if you treat it with stenting, there is very procedural TIAs which are much common. So if a person has any open surgery done, I mean any carotid surgery done, and has significant coronary artery disease, this patient should be subjected to endarterectomy. So essentially what I am trying to say is that the study itself said that stenting causes strokes because of DIAs, open surgery causes cardiac problems because of significant cardiac disease. So you have to decide what you have, which is why I said any patient who cannot undergo open surgery, meaning cannot undergo open surgery, must cardiac mortality, morbidity, if there is coexistent significant cardiac disease. So if a person doesn't have significant cardiac disease, he can undergo open surgery, which is much better. Much more better and longer outcomes and long-term patents.
So Dr. Ranjan Madhva, our fellow Mulani, my batchmate, my roommate, ex-HOD of Physical Medical Rehabilitation in Safdarjung, ex-additional MS of Safdarjung, and ex-director of National Institute of Tuberculosis and Respiratory Diseases. He can be a very good resource person.
Sir, good evening. Are these procedures and costs covered under insurance or CGHS?
They're all covered in insurance. They're all covered under the insurance, but unfortunately, most of them are not covered under CGHS because you see, CGHS goes by the procedures which are done at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and unfortunately, none of these procedures have been done at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I hope in the next couple of years, if these procedures are picked up by the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, they will be covered.
But sir, you said they will study from All India Institute of Medical Sciences about genicular artery
embolization. That's right, but it is still not covered under CGHS.
Dr. Bhalla sir, MS surgery sir actually. Wonderful practitioner at Jangpura.
Sir, in Buerger's disease, is there any role of endosurgical procedures?
See, the definition of Buerger's disease is it is an obliterative end arteritis. That means the entire artery is completely attenuated, stenosed and shrunken. There is no lumen, there is no passage, so you can't go through that lumen. So no endovascular procedure is possible in obliterative end arteritis because the artery is completely shrunken. It's like a wire. It's like a thin cord. So you cannot do it. Here, what we are doing for a lot of Buerger's patients is we are putting in stem cells. We have commercially available stem cells available now, and you can do it with almost 60-70% salvage. We are doing a lot of stem cell therapy work at the hospital.
Dr. Parekh sir, some of the most wonderful questions from Dr. Tulsi sir and Dr. Kangas.
Thank you, Ruchwan. So, Dr. Parekh, just three small questions to you. So, one was regarding IVL versus atherectomies. How do you choose? If the calcium burden is more, probably you go for atherectomy as compared to the IVL.
Excellent question, sir. If there is circumferential calcification, in which, and calcification means actually glowing calcification, do not try atherectomy. They are contraindicated because it will not cut through stone. So there, what you need to do is to stretch this calcium by an intravascular ultrasound, this lithotripsy, and this will open up the artery, remodulate it, and then you can either do an atherectomy or put in a stent.
Right. So talking about RFA or we have this laser ablation versus the venous seal. So probably venous seal is better, non-invasive as compared to the laser and the RFA.
Yeah. So
and you do not need anesthesia, just probably a local anesthesia for venous seal as compared to probably sedation and epidural with the laser. And the recovery period also is probably better, shorter in venous seal as compared to the RFA and the laser. Talk us about that.
So, excellent question. First of all, let me tell you that we at Medanta do not give any anesthesia to either laser or radiofrequency or venous. All our lasers and our venous are done, and radiofrequency ablations are all done under local anesthesia. No epidural, no spinal, nothing. Just a little bit of sedation so that the patient doesn't sort of get agitated. Minor sedation, which is basically midazolam, which the patient actually recovers.
Short acting, yeah.
So there is no sedation given and there is no anesthesia. That's number one. And number two is this. What was the other question that you said?
The venous.
So venous is something, see, this is the difference in technology. Venous is a chemical ablation, that means we are injecting a glue and we are occluding the veins. So there is no tumescence which is required. Otherwise, if you are using heat, whether it's laser or it is radiofrequency, this is heat being generated. So we have to inject tumescent anesthesia around the vein so that the skin doesn't get burned, and this makes it a little more invasive than venous. So the recovery time is a little better with venous. The invasiveness is better with, least invasive is the venous, and that is what we do.
And the price difference is about 50,000?
Yeah, price difference is about 50 to 75,000 because the cost of the venous is 1,20,000. The venous box is 1,20,000. That's the cost.
My last question would be regarding the recently published article in JAC, just a few months back, talking about TADV. So this seems to be a game changer. If nothing else works, probably this works. Talk us about the TADV.
I am not aware of this. What was TADV?
So TADV is transcatheter arterization of the deep veins. This has been FDA approved. So this is a recent technology, and probably if nothing succeeds, this succeeds. Talk us about that, sir.
Okay, so this was a procedure actually started by some friends of ours in Thailand. This was a procedure started. They used to do an open surgery. They used to do an arterialization of the deep veins at the foot level, and they used to arterialize the veins so that the reverse flow would occur up into the arteries. They would turn into this.
I'm referring to the PROMISE 3 study you published recently.
So then subsequently an endovascular procedure has come up. So no surgery is required. No surgery. Hello? Yeah. So now no surgery, there is a device by which we actually go through the vein, puncture the artery and place a stent across the artery and the vein, and this can be done percutaneously, and that is the device which has been approved by the US FDA recently. It is we haven't still got access to it in India yet, but it is something that they are talking about. So maybe in the next 2-3 months, hopefully we should get this here.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I am the last one to ask you. I am a fan of yours for 2 decades now. Sir, it was very amusing to know that why your name is Parik. Parak. सर मैं यही तो कह रहा हूँ. I was reminded of Asha Parik. वो भी आपसे कहीं से related है क्या? Sir, my question is about the scanners, recent scanners. You told us about CO2 angiography. There are now few scanners have come. iLive, iCare, wound scanners. They give the status of arteries and veins and vascularization of a wound. So, are you using that?
No, we are not using them because you see, these scanners only tell you that there is a disease. They will tell you where the blockages are, they will tell you where and how much the disease is. Perfusion. But what are we interested in? We are interested in treatment and therapy. So we want to do a procedure by which we can see what we have to do and actually do the procedure. You cannot do any procedure, you cannot perform any procedure with the scanners. You can only identify, but treatment you would still require the angiography or other.
So when you do endarterectomy, what happens to the endothelial scar? Does it have any hazards in future for
thrombosis or a fibrosis, whatever, anything.
So when we do an endothectomy, we are doing a complete removal of the intima and the media completely. What we are leaving behind is the last final layer of the media and the adventitia to support it. And 99.9% of the times that is so smooth and so clear. And because the flow is so good up into the carotid artery or distally, it does not usually cause any rethrombosis unless there is a technical problem. That means if you left behind a plaque, then it will thrombose. But if you've done a good clearance and a good job, you will not have any rethrombosis on the table. If it does, it's a technical problem, not a problem related to the plaque.
About the knee problem versus genicular artery embolization versus nerve block. What is the status? Has it been compared with the nerve block for the patient's care?
Okay, so the nerve block basically takes the pain away, but it also produces sensory anesthesia, sensory loss. If there is sensory loss, that patient, you are making a patient anesthetic in that area, and that is more prone to injuries. So that is something which may or may not give you the desire. It will give you the instant pain relief, yes, but it may or may not be the desired relief that you want, because you want the swelling to reduce, you want the pain to reduce because the swelling has reduced.
With genicular artery embolization, it will not produce any ischemia in the part?
No. Unless you have been aggressive and you have over-injected and the emboli have come out under the skin. If if you're not confident about what you've done, or you've overdone what you should have done, then yes, you can have some ischemia onto the skin, but by and large it is very minimal and it is very easily treatable with ice packs and stuff like that reduces the inflammation, and we've never seen, touch wood, we've never seen complications related to embolization in the skin and other areas.
My last point is food for thought. Are there any in the pipeline synthetic arteries to be made from human cells, stem cells or whatever, which will be resistant to thrombosis, and if they can take the place of stents?
Well, that would be great food for thought, you're absolutely right. Arteries are being made, human umbilical vein is something that is available in the market and you can actually use it as well. But as far as the the resistance to thrombosis, that will be a tall order. I don't think that is something which is at this point in time, but I think Mr. Elon Musk, I'm sure, can develop something, and we probably have something like that in the future.
Dr. Rajiv sir.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, your fan all the way from Central Delhi, Dr. Sajid, he has a question.
Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful talk today. Sir, just heard of the genicular artery embolization. It brought to my mind a patient of mine who is suffering very much with a hip joint problem. Hip joint arthritis started 5 years back. The patient is of developmental dysplasia of hip, operated at the age of 6 years. Now the age is 45. Doesn't want to go for hip replacement because just 15 years hence she will be again replacing hip. Can something similar be done about to alleviate the pain of the hip joint? The arthritis has developed in recent 5 years and is very painful, and the only solution seems to be the hip replacement. Can anything similar like genicular artery be done for the hip artery?
Absolutely right. Any joint in the body, whether it is the shoulder joint or the hip joint or the knee joint or the ankle joint, even plantar fasciitis.
Okay.
Yeah. Plantar fasciitis is a straightforward procedure. We can inject this thing into the medial and plantar arteries. In the outpatients, we can put this injection, we put in this thing, and plantar fasciitis can be treated. So any joint, anywhere, genicular artery of the shoulders or the knees or the hips or wherever can be used, can be embolized for local pain relief. Definitely possible.
So that's a wonderful. Thank you.
I would just request Dr. Rajiv sir to please come here. We would like to have a photograph. Dr. Podar